Hello. Oh, we're so tired. How's everybody doing today? This is a shorter one. This is only about 27 minutes, but I think we can probably squeeze some time out of this because I have thoughts about Crash Bandicoot. And once again, I'm sorry, this is a late night stream. I know a lot of you live in Europe and you'd rather spend your time more productively, like sleeping or, you know, sleeping. I don't know. Just finished Smotown's Armored Core 6 lore video. Oh, yeah. Have you finished New Game Plus yet? I finished New Game Plus, I think. I finished it this Sunday. Good stuff. Good stuff, I gotta say. The boss is way too easy. Armored Core 6 is really a game for the babies in the back. You know, it's too easy. No, but I really liked it. I was talking to Smotown earlier because he released his video, and it's like 100 minutes long. And I was talking to him like, man, I'm still drafting out a sort of rough outline of a script from notes I've gathered, and you've already busted out a video. You kidding me with this? But you know, he's a workhorse. He's really amazing. Hello everyone. Hello Aesir. Hey Adek. So yeah, like I said, this is a sort of short notice video, but it is also one that's relatively short. So I think we should just get started and have a rant at the creative team behind Crash Bandicoot 4. I actually really like Crash Bandicoot 4. I just think they made some missteps. I hate the Tanya sections. I hate the Dingodile sections. Stop confusing the Crash Bandicoot. Like, don't do Neo Cortex platforming. Don't do that. If you're going to do this, Twin Sanity was the right way to do it. But yeah, we'll talk more about that. Still up, pretty knackered though. Cat99, hello. Yeah, this is a chill stream. It's a chill one.
And welcome to this GDC session. I'm going to be talking about...
And like always, let me know if the audio levels screw up, as they tend to do.
About the development behind Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. This was a title that was released in the fall of 2020 for all major consoles and PC. And it's a new adventure in the series after a 12-year absence for the franchise. I'm going to be sharing about our approach to developing this new original game for one of the biggest gaming icons of the 90s. And how we took a classic IP that fans have a ton of nostalgia for, made it relevant and fresh while maintaining its authenticity. I'm going to share about the creative direction that led to how we uniquely balanced new and nostalgia. Now, to get started, if we haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Paul.
I do like a lot of the concept art around this game. I don't like how they rounded up Neo Cortex's head, though. I think that's kind of weird, but it has a sort of zany energy that I really admire. Bandicoot, such a funny word. Bandicoot is a funny word, that's true.
Studio head at Toys for Bob. I lead the creative art and design teams there.
Can we talk for a second about how Crash is like the perfect name? Because, you know, this was mascot platformers. They're all trying to be edgy. You know, you have Sonic, and he's like Speed, and it's like Sonic. What a cool name. But then it's like, nah, we have a guy called Crash. And I think this is the best mascot name of all time. Crash Bandicoot. Naughty Dog was on to something, I'm telling you. Those boys are going somewhere.
We are a core crew of 70 developers based out of the Bay Area in California, and this is our extended team. We're really blessed to have support from incredibly talented teams and individuals.
They have Jolene Cujo here developing for them. That's really cool.
From all over the world, from countries like Germany, France, Canada, Israel, and China, just to name a few. Believe it or not, this year marks the 25th anniversary of Crash, and so I think we're going to have some great things to celebrate further on down in the year, but it's a timely place to talk about the newest game in the series.
2 years
Before diving in, I think we should start and rewind all the way
More
to
like
the
the
start.
Crash of 1983. Hey now.
And where we decided to take it to today. So you're probably familiar with Crash Bandicoot. You're probably, at least we're familiar or engaged with.
So a little bit of history here. Played it. Played it. Played it. Played it. Played it. No, wait, I didn't play the DS one. I played these two. So I've played most of these games.
With him as he debuted on the PlayStation in 1996, but you may not have known that every single year after that, there's been a brand new Crash Bandicoot game, at least one, up until 2008, and that's the point at which the IP went a little bit dormant and quiet. And more recently, Activision has remastered the original games in the series, and in 2017, Vicarious Visions did an amazing job remastering the first three games, which they called the Insane Trilogy, and followed in 2019 by Beanox remastering Crash Team Racing. Now, as at Toys for Bob, we played a support role in both these titles. We also remastered another big gaming icon of the 90s in Spyro in 2018.
Toys for Bob did Unholy War. You didn't like Crash 4? I was shocked by how much I liked it. I was expecting to fully hate that thing.
And this is the point at which we start to engage Activision in conversation about a potential new title for 2020. Now, internally, this was being described as a reboot, which suggests a really drastic overhaul. And perhaps that was a term that was being used prematurely. So one thing that we did in these early conversations was to step back for a second, and we wanted to tease out what the real goals of this before we start to embark on this development journey. So one thing that I love to do as an exercise to do this and to put a little bit more precision on fuzzy topics or things that might be a little bit subjective is to use this exercise of spectrums. And spectrums are a great way of putting two extremes on both ends and then lining up ideas and trying to place them physically along those spectrums just to tease out where you might align with other teammates or where you may disagree. So in this case,
I'm sure he's just about to get into the good stuff. It's been a lot of like preamble, a lot of setup. Let's hope he delivers.
The term reboot on one end of
I hate that he is calling it a remaster. It's a remake. Come on. I like remake, remaster, reimagining, reboot. It's all just a wash to me. These words have completely lost all meaning, and everybody defines these things very differently. To me, a remaster is when you take an old game and you just spiff it up with more frames and more graphics or something like that. Whereas a remake is you take a game, you rebuild it from the ground up. A reimagining is that's like what a remake should be, but it's like these terms don't mean anything anymore.
Spectrum, which suggests reinvention. And then on the other end, we explored this idea of a sequel, which suggests an evolution of ideas or a continuation. And we looked at a whole slew of games that we felt kind of existed along the spectrum. There's examples of successful titles and not so successful titles on both ends of this spectrum. There's nothing inherently right or wrong about where these land, but this was a useful exercise for us to compare and contrast in terms of what are the goals that are unique for Crash Bandicoot and moving that series into the future, into relevancy for today. As an observation of doing this exercise together, we all saw that on the sequel end of things, the opportunity is to be reverent, to really appeal to the core fan base. The risks may be that the titles may not stand out enough or may be perceived to be more of the same. On the reboot side of things, there's this huge opportunity for innovation and just wiping the canvas clear and starting fresh. The risks there are that you may...
You're saying the correct meaning. It's sad that they don't use it properly. Yeah, it's just like these words. They don't mean anything.
Alienate the core fan base or introduce something that is unrecognizable. Another lens that we apply...
It's interesting to me here that they would even bother going through this here graph gradient chart or whatever they were doing. This is a useless exercise because rebooting Crash Bandicoot is a ridiculous idea. This came out in... when was it? Was it in 2021? I don't quite remember when About Time came out, but like... This is after the sort of soft reboot idea came. This is after, like, they restarted Star Wars. Everybody was doing, like, yeah, we can just do a continuation of something. Like, even Terminator did it. Everybody was doing it. I think Ghostbusters did it. You can just... And Halloween was doing it. You can just ignore years of continuity, and you can just go back to the point where everybody universally agrees that this thing was great, and you just continue on from there. I have no idea why they would consider doing a reboot.
Is how,
especially when one of the great things about going back to Crash Bandicoot, a series that has been sort of trashed and very dormant for such a long time, and like if they did a new Planescape Torment or if they did a new KOTOR, which they allegedly are doing, though that project seems to be deader by the day, one of the great things about that is that those games were made in a very different era where design priorities were very different. And one of the great gifts when you go back to we can just make a sequel to a game that came out 15 years ago is that all of the developments which have happened since then you can ignore all of them and you can just restart development as if it was still 2005. And you can take that 2005 lens and you can just approach it as if you're making a game from 2005, completely distant from all of the developments in the industry that have happened since then. But if you reboot it, then all of a sudden you have the expectations of, well, this doesn't have enough cutscenes, or, well, it really doesn't have enough complexity gameplay-wise, or it doesn't have enough depth, or whatever. So I think if they seriously thought about doing a reboot, no, thank you.
These extremes on the spectrum approach fans, and where we kind of concluded on this was that sequels are great positioning for titles that have a strong, thriving, and large existing fan base, where reboots might be one where there's a very specific intention to go after a new audience, or maybe the core fan base has grown out of that and is passing that on to a new generation. So looking at fans for Crash, we had a great benefit of seeing very, very recent results coming out of the recent remasters. And it was actually a little bit surprising how many people showed up and how many people were really excited about these remasters. And
yeah, guys, imagine imagine re-releasing games that literally everybody loved. What a surprise. It was a smash success. What?
Profile of these players.
Crash Bandicoot reboot.
Like myself,
can I kick you out of chat?
Who were probably 6 to 10 years old when the PlayStation debuted. They have a really strong inner child and they look fondly at the experiences from their youth. We also looked at the catalog of the whole history of Crash titles up until this point, and one very striking observation was that both critically and commercially, the high point was at the early part of that series. And so another thing that may come out of this is that the memories and the associations and the fondness for this franchise probably all stack at the very front end of this time.
But actually, the series peaked right here. Right here. Yeah.
So with all these pieces together, we aligned and held hands to say what Crash 2020 is going to be is a sequel to the original trilogy, and it's going to be positioned primarily for the core Crash audience. Now, this is the first major guardrail statement. It's a really big stake in the sand for us, and it really crisped up when we started to...
That is a really wild thing to say, because, like, on a gameplay level, I get it, but if we're just going to be honest with ourselves, Crash Twinsanity is the real blueprint here. Like, the characterization of literally every character in the game has nothing to do with the original games and everything to do with Crash Twinsanity. So it's weird that, or maybe he explains it better in a bit. I don't know.
It's a really big stake in the sand for us, and it really crisped up when we started to call this project Crash 4.
So
at this point, we were setting up the technical foundations for this new project. We were starting to prototype. We were starting to...
Okay, this is actually kind of interesting. Game is jump, spin, slide, slam. Okay, collectathon. Okay, time travel. Why is that? Like, I guess that's... But that's not integral to Crash. I don't know. 2D to 3D perspective shifts. I don't think that's as necessary as they maybe think it is. New vehicles. No, the vehicle levels in Crash were always the worst. New abilities, yeah, that's fine. New bosses and chases, that's fun. For 25 to 40-year-olds, whoa. But yeah, hard but fair, okay. Crash was never hard but fair. Crash was ruthlessly unfair in many ways. But that's fine. Lots of replay, yeah. Cartoony animation, yeah, this is all good. New obstacles, playable heroes, warp rooms, limited skins. I think skins are fine. Co-op, camera control, yeah. Game isn't open world. See, immediately I think Red X, like, nope. Crash Bandicoot absolutely works as an open world. Don't limit yourself to not doing that just out of principle. Plumber Boy, what? Crash Dialogue, yeah, that's a good one. Uncharted storytelling. We all know exactly what this means, and yes, it's good that they made this call. I think this is fine. Like I said, I think Crash Twinsanity should have been the blueprint to the next generation of Crash games, but because certainly I think Crash Twinsanity is a much more interesting game than Crash Bandicoot 4. But
to do concept art.
That's me. I'm Crash Twinsanity's strongest soldier. So you would expect to hear that.
Different environments and characters. And this is where another spectrum exercise is really useful for many of our different teams, as we start to ask ourselves, what are some things that we can presume this game is, and what are things that we can presume at this early point what this game isn't? So as an example, one thing we know is from our guardrail statement is that this game is going to be for 25 to 40-year-olds. We know that this is a sequel to the original trilogy, and so there's certain elements like the antagonist, neocortex, and entropy are going to play a major part. The idea of time travel and just time in general is going to be a strong theme that we want to continue. We also knew on the other side of things what the game isn't is it's not going to be open world. It's not going to be a beat 'em up in the way that some of the latter sequels move gameplay and game design towards. We know that it's not going to have MTX. It just does not jive with what we're trying to do here and what the series has been thus far. And then in the middle, there's a lot of ideas and open questions, personal ambitions that we have for ourselves that we weren't sure. It wasn't as clear in those early days. And so we put them deliberately in the middle, and it was really helpful for us to focus on that as decisions start.
But see, like, the great thing about Crash Twinsanity's open world, he's obviously talking about Mind Over Mutant and Crash of the Titans with beat 'em up, and good call. Those games had a lot of problems. But the cool thing about the open world in Crash Twinsanity was that it was still very much, like, it was just, you take Crash 1 and you glue all the maps together to create a sort of interconnected large world that flows in and out of itself again, and you basically get the world of Crash Twinsanity. It's not as elegant as something like Dark Souls, but it's very much in that same mold, where you're not walking around the obstacles, you navigate the world through the obstacle course. It's just all compartmentalized into one cohesive whole, and I really think that's a stronger approach than the Warp Room gimmick they introduced in the second game.
Started to solidify, we could reevaluate and move these unknowns further over to the left or further to the right. Now, our creative director took all of these different conversations across all the different teams, all of these debates, all of these presumptions, and boiled these down into 3 big statements that expressed what this game is about its tone, its gameplay, and its world.
Okay. Let's go over this. Tone. Jackass meets Looney Tunes. I think Looney Tunes is apt. Jackass meets Looney Tunes, I don't really love that. No, I don't love that. I think you could just say it's Looney Tunes. It's Gen X Looney Tunes. I think you could say it's like 90s Looney Tunes. Looney Tunes for that generation. That's a better way. Gameplay. Tense, precise execution. Yeah. I think that's fine. I would also say, and this comes from my Crash Twinsanity love, again, flow. The older games don't super flow well until you're really familiar with the levels, but you can get into a real zen thing with Twinsanity. World is colorful, dangerous universe. I think that's also good. I would say, add to world, that Crash Twinsanity has always had, when it's a good game, it's always had this conflict of like nature versus the corrupting effects of science. So in Crash 1, you travel through Wampa Island, and gradually the levels become more polluted, and you get into like the industrial sites from Neocortex's factory, and you would sort of want to import that into the world. But you know, this is fine. This is all fine.
I'm going to step through each of these and talk about how these influenced our ideas and the developments in our prototypes. These statements, initially, our goal was to try and get crisp on what exactly is the definition of the DNA of this franchise. But it ultimately served as the pillars for what this game is. I'll start with tone. Now, tone is wide-reaching. It affects how the game looks. It affects how the game sounds. It affects how the story is told. But before we go into these wider-reaching aspects of the game, we had to find the center, the core, the foundation in which we could grow everything out. And that starts with Crash as a character himself. And the statement that we have for tone is that it's Jackass meets Looney Tunes. It's a game about just barreling into danger, and it's got the silliness and the wackiness of Looney Tunes, and this is the original inspiration for this.
Okay, when he puts it like that, I get what he means, and yeah, I think that's a fair characterization then.
Series and harking back towards that original DNA. So starting with Crash, we looked at the series, and Crash over the years has actually evolved quite a bit. He's retained some core elements about him, like his color and the way he wears pants and his red shoes, but he's actually made some pretty drastic changes over time. And we know that the game is about a continuation of the original trilogy, and so we want to focus on the first 3 expressions. And the Insane Trilogy, the remasters, did an amazing job of going back to that source and bringing it up to modern standards and to a whole new level of fidelity. So it seemed like one thing that we were asking ourselves is, why not just take that look and continue it? Now, the reason why we didn't was because one thing that we agreed on and aligned very early on is that we didn't want this new game to be perceived as a sequel to a remaster or a DLC extension to a remaster.
Ooh. So that's what they meant by this. Okay. I like that sentiment, that this is not, we're not picking up the ball from the remaster, we're picking up the ball from the original games. I like that. Hi, Flower Owl. We're talking about Crash Bandicoot.
Immediate, just at a glance, understanding that this is a new expression, this set itself apart from the remasters, that this was a game for 2020. And so we were already early on path
2020,
to
it's older than
presenting a new interpretation for Crash. And we've got this amazing team of artists.
Oh my god. No, thank you.
And before we did put any pencil to paper, we also looked at some of the surrounding media that influenced our impressions and our memories of who Crash is. There's obviously the Crash mascot guy in the commercials that we all love. There's internet memes more recently. Crash has his own manga. He's been a guest star on TV shows like Skylanders. So all of these are different ingredients we want to make sure that we incorporated because they're a part of the fabric of who we remember and how we remember what Crash is.
No.
Now, our art director tasked our amazing and talented artists with going really, really wide and pushing the envelope with the interpretation for Crash.
Okay, so this here is obviously the best one. Like the wild feral thing, like, yeah, it's its own thing. Cute, no thank you. Heroic, nope. Edgy, no, because edgy assumes a level of cognizance that he shouldn't have. It's this right here. He's just like a dumb guy who's just ready for. He's driven purely by the adrenaline rush of
starting from a safe interpretation to really, really pushed and
plowing in
and
the
challenging
boxes.
convention. And we gave them targets. So we're looking for a cute version of Crash Bandicoot, a more edgy version, something that's a little bit more heroic. And we also gave freedom for personal interpretation. Just go where your heart takes you with how you remember Crash. And as we got all these drawings together, we could see a lot of the commonality of these drawings, and that formed the center of who we believed he was. And we selected a handful of drawings and poses that represented the facets of Crash's personality, and ultimately asked a single artist to interpret this down into a single style. Now, these poses and this sheet ultimately served as the model sheet for the 3D sculpt that we see here today.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that we know that this game is that it's a cartoon, and we know from the original developers at Naughty Dog that their ambitions for the title.
You like the heroic? I think it's like I don't think it looks bad or anything, but this does not read as Crash Bandicoot to me. This reads as like, Fursona, my Bandicoot Fursona kind of deal, more so.
For it to be a living cartoon, and
not my,
back to Looney Tunes. So we looked at that source and we made sure that as we built out our designs and we built out our models and our rigs.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk about something. I hate this redesign so much, because she's standing here next to Crash Bandicoot, and there's probably gonna be better images. She looks like a character out of a completely different game. Her proportions are just like. She has like hot woman proportion of like a big butt and all that, but nobody else does. It's ridiculous. I'll talk more about it if we get a better image.
That our animators were equipped to really push this level of.
And like, yeah, I know that Tana had like wild, sexy woman proportion in the first game, but you don't bring the character back and do a complete redesign just to make her like generic action woman. You do it to sort of, no, we have to make this character actually fit in this universe. And I know that she's actually from a different universe in this game, where it's like pirate themed or whatever, but I don't know. I didn't love
deformation, and to get that extreme movement, to simulate that motion blur, to get that silkiness and that clarity of interpolation into our aesthetic. Now, physical humor is fantastic. It's great. It's universal. But we also want to make sure that we are specifically speaking to our audience of 25 to 40-year-olds. And we do that in a number of ways. In one sense, what we did was
like look at Coco's redesign. I think that's much better. And if Tana's redesign had just been like, she looks like a taller Coco. I don't know.
The namings and for the skins or the titles for the levels, we added in some suggestions of innuendo to make sure that we've got things that might sail over a kid's head, but it's a little wink at our audience for 25 to 40-year-olds. We introduced situations that were a little bit more edgy in nature, but it didn't push it.
Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about. Look at the proportion of every character here, like oversized heads, really sort of animated faces and stuff, and then you just have like this character here. Like, this is what a human being looks like in this universe. Like, kind of a wild, exaggerated character. But you know what I mean? Like, her head is half the size of Coco's head. Which design is more charismatic? Right? It really bugged me throughout the whole game that they went with this design. I don't get it.
Too far, but like the fact that Entropy takes his
big horny
his
energy
to a whole new level.
Yeah, I think, like, I don't know, because she never read as sexy to me, but he has like proportions of a character who's meant to be sexy, so I don't really know what the animators were going for here.
With this creepy, incestuous love for his multiverse self. And we also wrote dialogue in the way to make sure that this game was very self-aware and was making reference to its own past, the fact that it is a game, that it has a history, like this joke that's kind of acknowledging the fact that it's ignoring some of the other sequels that are coming after this in its chronological timeline.
Ha 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 ha.
Now, our statement for gameplay is tense, precise execution. And just like with tone, before we built out and made sure that this affected all aspects of game design, we needed to find a home base, and that was...
The game had text which said big horn energy? Oh.
in Crash himself.
Well, I still stand by what I said. I don't, like... When you look at his design, and he went over this earlier, there's, like, clearly a lot of thought that went into how to present the character, like, the personality just in the design itself, and how are you going to make this character animate. And you can see that love spread across the entire lineup, and then you have Tana, who just, like... It seems like they just went for, like I said, generic action woman with, like, big butt, sexy proportions, but she's not sexy in the game, so it's just like, she feels wildly out of place in this game.
Ultimately, with Crash as a game, we want to make sure that the core verbs of jump, spin, slide, slam is really, really satisfying to pull off. It feels familiar. One of the original appeals of this set is that it's super, super approachable, and yet the title is very challenging and very demanding, and it really asks a lot of skill and it really asks you to master the game through skill.
It asks you to get good.
At its best, it is hard but fair. And one thing, as we started to block out certain levels, we found that
Dark Souls.
It's just inherently difficult to just understand depth as you're jumping to and from perspective. And so one thing that we did pretty early on was to try to figure out how can we preserve the level of difficulty, but make sure that the player has all the tools and the information at hand to land these really very difficult precision asks. And so we actually added a very overt indicator underneath Crash so that at any time you know precisely where you're going to land.
Yeah, so the indicator he's talking about is giving Crash a shadow. Crash Bandicoot has had a shadow, I believe, since the first game. Certainly he had a shadow in the remasters. He had a shadow in Twinsanity. It's really weird in Twinsanity, though, because his shadow wouldn't always be cast on metal crates. And when metal crates were just hovering in the air and you had to jump to them, it was really difficult to see. It was a baffling... I don't understand it, because sometimes it did, and it's like the shadow was cast on crates and it was cast on natural geometry, so like... I don't get it. Like, I don't get why the shadow wouldn't be cast all the time, but, I don't know. Like, Super Mario 64 figured out that you put a shadow underneath Mario so the player knows where they're standing.
And we had a ton of ideas and prototypes in terms of new mechanics and new abilities for Crash, new vehicles, new playable heroes. But there was some blurriness in terms of how an ability, depending on how it's framed, it could easily have been a vehicle, it could have easily been a new hero. So it was important for our design team to make sure that there's a separation in function, not just in theme, between all these different ideas. They all had very specific individual lanes that they occupied. For example, with new abilities, this was, we isolated these to the new quantum masks, and these abilities were always going to be triggered on a button, and they always added on top of the core verbs of run, jump, spin, slide, slam. On the other hand of things, there's new vehicles. It was almost like a subtraction of control. And then you've got new things like wall running and grind railing, and completely new heroes like Dingodile or Neocortex that is just a completely different approach to interacting with these core elements like Wumpa or Crate.
Okay, this is I really like this. I like this sort of quadrant of how to differentiate what each differentiation to the core gameplay, how it should be characterized. I don't think they need this. I feel like... So I talked about it earlier, that I think Twinsanity did multiple playable characters really well. well, better than they did here. I think the neocortex sections, like, they kind of work because they're more puzzly than they are platforming, because he's like a scientist, and I don't like those sections kind of succeed because you just roll through them, and they can be difficult though. And the Nina Cortex sections, they really worked because it's the same core Crash gameplay. It's just like, what if you take the sort of basic Crash Bandicoot gameplay and you just tilt it a little bit? So what if Crash Bandicoot was a little bit more focused on an action game? Well, now you can do ranged attacks by like shooting her metal hands out. Now you can do these sorts of, like, you still have the spin attack, and now you also can do wall jumping. And it's like, okay, this is a different interpretation of the same core mechanics of Crash Bandicoot presented with a character. And I think that's a really good way to do it. But Neocortex, not really so much, because it's just playing a different game at that point. And that's kind of why I don't like Dingo Dial sections. I don't like Tana sections, because they should be different interpretations of the basic Crash Bandicoot gameplay. So for Dingo Dial, he like has a flamethrower and all that. I don't know how you take the Crash gameplay and sort of tweak it around to make it Dingo Dial gameplay, but I think that's the solution you need to solve for. Maybe yeah, like I said, I don't know. I also think the same for, like, Neocortex's sections here are maybe a bit more understandable, because again, they're trying to take the Crash Bandicoot game and making it more puzzle focused. So you have to like precision aim and like locate enemies in proper positions to make moving platforms and such. But yeah, I don't think they really landed on the new playable heroes.
Or even just the feel of how
but I do like that they clearly knew how to differentiate where to put each bracket
through danger, but Neocortex is more cerebral, and so those levels presented an opportunity to
where to put these features in the different brackets
before you execute it on. So this gave us a once we understood and identified these individual lanes, we knew what the ingredients were for the game, and we started to lay them out on this. It was essentially is a roadmap of the entire game, level by level. And we put this giant physical board in the office. It was very unavoidable on your way to your desk. Everyone was constantly having conversation around this. And we were playing with the sequencing of levels, how they would flow into each other. It influenced how we told the story. It influenced as well. We did breakdowns of the different sequences and sections within a level as well. So we could see of the ingredients that we're sprinkling in, how we could be strategic and deliberate about inserting novelty and new mechanics. So one thing that was really important is that we're expecting that if you're going to play a game that's called Crash Bandicoot, that the vast majority of the time is going to be about how satisfying it is to play Crash. And we didn't want this to be oversaturated with new experiences or new heroes that might not be as interesting to you. So this was a really great...
The game is obviously mostly about Crash. Crash is probably like 80-90% of the game, but I still feel like there was too much focus on the other characters.
Way as a high-level approach to make sure that we could see them very deliberately, that we built up on the difficulty in a way that stacked on each other, and that just everything fit together in a way that always went back to complementing the core Crash gameplay. This also influenced some ideas that we had, some presumptions that we had about the game. Like, we presumed that there was going to be a warp room structure for the game. And if you're not familiar with warp rooms are essentially little hubs where there were maybe 5 or 6 different level nodes that you could approach in any order that you choose. And once you've completed the majority of those, you could move on to the next warp room. Now, we presumed that we were going to inherit this coming from Crash 3. But as we started to lay out some of our other goals, like wanting this to be very challenging but fair, and we also wanted to tell a linear story, and as we start to sequence things on the our campaign roadmap, it became very difficult by allowing the player to access different levels at different times without introducing a lot of complex things that would be tuning experiences in a variable way on the other levels.
The trick there is to either you have to just sort of do the hard work of actually sequence mapping everything differently, or you just cut back on the amount of story you have to tell, and you be a bit more economic, like in Crash 2, where Neocortex's communications with Crash after you finish a mission there are very interchangeable. He's just like, "Crash, you need to get me more crystals." But I don't know, maybe if you want to do a more sort of linear told story, yeah, it's good that they didn't go for this, and potentially sabotage themselves, because you have to choose the format that's best at the story you're wanting to tell. I don't agree that this was the right way of going about making this game, but since they chose this direction, I'm glad that they made the change that they did, I guess.
We actually went back on this and said, this game is actually going to go back to a very linear structure, and it benefits us so that we could be tighter, and the experiences that the player just completed could be more reliable, so we could build on those. So that also influenced our approach to difficulty. Tense, precise execution, it says hard, right? It says difficult. And one of our presumptions was that we were going to introduce a difficulty selection, that you could start this game and say, if you wanted to play really difficult, you could choose hard. If you wanted it easier, you could play that. But it turns out platformer is a little bit more difficult to tune in that way. Like, for an example, as a combat game, you have options, numeric options to tune up your hit points or your combat effectiveness. But platformer, if you've got a gap in the ground, and it's the level, it's the world, it's built very specifically to specific metrics. Tuning the difficulty of that gap in the ground that you have to fall to death is it's difficult to do.
I mean, you can fiddle around with the fall speed. You can give the player outs when they make a bad jump. You could have it be, just more checkpoints generally. You can have more extra lives. You could give the player more masks. You could, you could give the player some invincibility frames on their hitbox, so that when enemies hit them, or when the player jumps into danger, they have a better chance of sort of maneuvering around it. You could give Crash maybe another sequence to his jump, so like he can already do a flip. What if he can do like a double jump into a flip, but only on the easier difficulty, so that you have more mid-air control? There's ways of doing it. But I guess then you have to design the levels for the retro style, and just assume that, so you just design it for the retro style, playtest it with that, and then you give the player the added bonuses. And provided there's not like if we're slowing down the jump to make it easier to navigate, obviously you have to test that against every jump to make sure that there's no like timed crates that are exploding here, and actually having a slower jump is bad in that instance. But provided you can map it out early enough, that shouldn't really be a problem. But I think this is fine, because it was important to them to preserve the sort of Crash experience. And if they start finicking around with the specific parameters of jumping and the hitboxes and such, but only for one playstyle, like that playstyle wouldn't really echo the sentiment of the old games, quite like if you just give the player more checkpoints or something like that. It can be done, but it's hard to fix it here, because they also have the added ambition of preserving the mood and the sort of attitude to challenge of the older games. So kudos, I think they basically found a compromise that worked. I can't complain. Speaking of difficulty, how is it handled in my game? So far it isn't, because I've done all the level design, and I've mapped out the entire story. I've written the story. I've created most of the enemies, and I haven't really. I think difficulty is just something that I'm going to have to balance around during design. So I like earlier levels, earlier segments are obviously going to do less damage than later sequences, but I don't know if there's going to be specific difficulty options. I haven't playtested it enough to make a call on that. It's not going to be a particularly difficult game. It's just I think you can accomplish a lot by just doing a good sort of pacing. If you can just sort of theme the level appropriately, you could set up encounters in good ways. You could take away the player's visibility so that there's more darkness around. The player has to move slower because there's a bit of anxiety. You have like a slow sort of horror ambient music playing in the background, and then you don't even need to put that many enemies in the level, because the player sort of does the job of attuning the length of an encounter themselves, because they don't want to speed through the level and accidentally aggro 10 different enemies. But like I said, I can't really say about difficulty right now because I haven't play tested it as a completed product. I play tested the demo a lot, and I have issues with that, but I haven't really been able to play through the game as a completed work yet because there are 2 or 3 sequences I haven't scripted yet? Question mark. So yeah, an unsatisfying answer.
Some ideas of layering on things that would make things easier, so that you could undo a death, or maybe you could fly over certain things, or had some currency that gave you some ability to bypass some of these challenges. But we found that it was going against our original intention of preserving the game's difficulty but being fair. See. So after lots and lots of exploration,
it's exactly like I said.
Exploration and prototyping, we ultimately landed on a place in which we split out the playstyle into 2 different things, not difficulty, but playstyle, so that players could choose a modern mode, which had unlimited lives, but you could always reset to the last checkpoint. The difficulty and the challenge of the levels were preserved, but you could always try again. And in retro, we had the classic behavior of introducing limited lives, and if all your lives expired, we would start you as a hard reset at the beginning of the level. So again, challenges preserved across both options, but in this way, the player was able to choose the level of punishment or masochism for this game, respecting both a modern approach to things and what was nostalgic for the experience. And finally, on world, our statement here is that this game is a colorful, dangerous universe. This is probably the most straightforward of all the pillars, because what Crash and the classic games were already started at such a high point, and we just looked for opportunities in which we could tap into that and dial it to 11. So one of many people's memories, myself included, about the original games was that they were surprisingly lush and detailed and packed with just detail that weren't seen in other platforms of that time. Now, obviously, we're not constrained by hardware in the same way. We wanted to make sure that we tapped into that same memory and same feeling.
I will say, on the visuals, I think the remakes and the reboots or whatever, the remasters and the sequel, and you know what? Actually, I'll go so far as to say that the PlayStation 2 games suffered from this as well. The PlayStation 1's polygon limit really created a lot of like sharp angles, and it makes for visual aesthetics that's really wild and crazy. And I don't think this has ever been recaptured in any subsequent game after the 5th generation. Even my beloved Crash Twinsanity looks like a flat trash heap compared to this insane universe. But also, Crash Twinsanity being more of an open world makes the levels have to be more open, so you can't necessarily have it this cluttered, but still, there's a better solution.
Strained by hardware in the same way, we wanted to make sure that we tapped into that same memory and same feeling, and so we very deliberately built out opportunities that exploited this or highlighted the fact that we built out these new environments that were way more detailed, had way more storytelling involved, that compelled you on this journey towards the very end. The classic games, this is probably one of the most iconic moments of the Crash series, is this boulder chase that's running towards the camera. And we wanted to make sure that we tapped into that nostalgia, but again, dial it up to 11 on this. So how do you take something that's exciting like this and take it to the next level? Well, you take that ball and you turn it into a live ghost character, a spirit monster that's chasing after you. We make sure that every single beat that he's interacting and smashing with the environment, that we're tuning the rubber banding so that it is so precise in such a way that it always guarantees a very, very narrow escape in that experience. In the bosses, what was formerly a hopscotch exercise that was over in a matter of minutes, we dial this up to be larger than life, into a multi-phase escalation of ultimate tests that really ask challenging questions of all the skills that you picked up and mastered along the way.
I don't remember any Crash for answer boss except the one that's currently on screen. So even though they're probably better designed, they're not nearly as memorable as the ones from previous games.
Now, with all of this novelty and these new worlds, we made one thing that we did to ground these new environments and experiences was to make sure that we sprinkled in a bunch of Easter eggs throughout the game. Made sure that there's enough detail for eagle-eyed fans, but also to tap into the richness of the IP that didn't get an opportunity in the main storyline, or just it would have been too crammed if we tried to pull in all of the interesting characters and then tell a compelling story through there. We even took this to a point of integrating this the woe meme that's taken over the internet in the past, and making a beat out of this to really highlight and again wink to the core fan base. So that takes me to the end of this talk. Out of these 3,
Can you guys tell that he did this talk in the middle of COVID. Like the guy's clearly in like his office or at his home. There's no audience in front of him to sort of for him to gauge interest or anything. Oh my god, I'm actually I forgot to turn off night mode. We got yellow mode for a little second there.
Three pillars and statements about DNA, these did not change from the very beginning to the end, and they were very, very useful for us to always go back to as a measurement of are we aligned in the things that we're adding to this game. Underneath all of these statements, though, would say that it was really, really important for us to listen to the fans. This is ultimately a love letter to fans, and so it's really important that we spend a lot of time listening in on the community boards, on Reddit, on Discord, just to hear people's nostalgia, their fondness for these classic games, and also their wishes for what a new game was. We also, I think it was really, really important for us and really helpful for us to also hire fans as well. We had representation of really, really hardcore fans in each of the teams, and that was incredibly useful to have as we introduce new ideas, to always have a gut check, someone we could just walk on over to or call up to check and see if we were straying off or being off-brand or inauthentic in our decisions. So that takes me to this little plug here, is that at Toys for Bob we are hiring both fans and developers, or if you're a developer and a fan of titles like Crash 4 and Call of Duty Warzone. If you're looking for more information, please take...
Oh, it's all just been a gigantic ad to work there. Yeah, you know, it seems like a fine place to work. I probably wouldn't make it. I have too many ideas for how to make a Crash. I actually have a notebook. It's currently on my on the dresser near my bed, which is just like, here are game ideas. And I think I have like a 12-page outline for a sequel to Crash to Insanity that begins with Neocortex is in like a mental asylum because of the ending of Crash to Insanity. You know, Crash is in his brain, and they've managed to take Crash out in the beginning of my game, but Neo is just like a potato, so they took him to a mental asylum, and it's actually run by Ripperoo. And the first mission is you have to break Neocortex out because there's a new danger that's come to Wampa Island. And from there you go in there, and it's like you can go actually into Neocortex's brain, and then you can have like weird sort of dreamlike crazy levels, like not too dissimilar to Psychonauts now that I think about it. And good lord, there's so many different levels. One of the levels have you two in like an underground area where you have to assemble a rocket to escape. And Neocortex, he like shoots the rocket up, and then he exits the rocket, and he jumps out in a parachute. And his plan is just like, yeah, Crash, you're not getting out of the rocket, you're staying in. So you jump out of the rocket later, though, so you end up in a tall mountain, and it's the what is it called, like Eternal Highway or Lost Highway or whatever, that rope bridge, those two rope bridge levels from Crash 1, you're in that, and way below you can see that Neocortex's parachute is like snagged on a tree that's hanging over a ledge, so he's completely immobile there. And your job in that level is basically just to descend across an interesting sort of fun platforming sequence to make your way down there. And each of the different sections was supposed to have like a fun little mini story going on. So the underground level would be like, there'd be dinosaurs there, and Uka would actually be resting there, trying to get some peace from the Bandicoot Neocortex shenanigans on the surface after Twinsanity. So yeah, like... But I'm not going to work for Toys for Bob because I don't want to work in a team. But yeah, I was thinking, it is kind of late. It would have been fun to go over the Crash to Insanity video I did and just sort of quickly watch that again. But, nah, we're not going to have time, sadly. I hope the notebook is cleaner than your main laptop. I will show pages from the notebook in Discord later. What's your favorite level that you made if you did make a sequel to Crash Bandicoot? Okay, so 1 second, I'm gonna get the book. Also, I called the game Crash: The Madness of 2 because it's kind of like it's a sequel to Twinsanity. In the forest, situation. Then you and Neocortex go to the hidden world. It's probably what I talked about earlier with the mental asylum. Because that was sort of the first level that came to mind. And it's actually, I'm looking at it now, that's not the first level. The first level is just Insanity Island, and then you go to the Insane Asylum. Then you have, like, you bring... There you save Neocortex, and you bring him back to the laboratory where Dr. Embryo connects him to, like, like a table or a bed, and there are 5 cords going into his brain that, like, connect to a helmet that's on his head. And those 5 cords all lead to 5 different rooms. So you have, like, the third level is basically just a short warp room section where you can go into 5 distinct phases in his life, and you're sort of getting to be reintroduced to his relationship with Crash Bandicoot through that. And you kind of get into the mind of the Mad Doctor that way. Then he sort of wakes up after you finish all 5 levels, and the two of you have like a rumble section, like in Crash to Insanity, where you're going down like a forest or something. And from there you go into the underground dinosaur world, where you need to assemble the rocket to escape. And you escape, but Neocortex, like I said earlier, he tries to jettison Crash Bandicoot into space, so you have to sort of descend down a mountain to get to him snagged on a branch. And the villain there was supposed to be a vulture. I don't have it in front of me. What the hell was the main villain of the story supposed to be? Oh my god, yes. So the first, no, actually, my favorite level is probably the first level on Insanity Island, because what the story was, the villain, he's like just a corporate industrialist, and he comes in there and he's building like parking spaces, and he's building like high rises and skyscrapers, and he's doing all these things to sort of build up Wampa Island to be prime real estate. And nobody wants that, obviously, so they need Neocortex to act as like, you can only have one sort of alpha predator in an environment, and Neocortex, he like brings things into harmony. And without him, you just have these crazy people coming in there, because Crash to Insanity is really like an embodiment of chaos. So you want a villain who's like too orderly. And the gimmick for the first level was that there are like constructions happening in Wampa Island. And what you're supposed to do to get into the mental asylum is that you're supposed to disrupt the construction. So like break windows and throw planks around and stuff like that. Just cause a lot of chaos, because then the society that's intruding into Wampa Island, they're so orderly that they think anybody who acts like Crash Bandicoot, he must surely be insane. So they throw you in the insane asylum. And from there you go and invest and break Neo out. Like I said, I'll share more photos. I'll share more of this notebook on the Discord chat. It's in the description if anybody's interested into this wild fever dream I had. But thanks everybody for stopping by. It's a shorter stream today, but it's getting pretty late. If you're interested in more Crash, like I said, I did a video on it, the Crash to Insanity video. Other than that, thank you all for watching. Bye bye.